Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. I'm Toni Marcolini, and today I'm joined by filmmaker Nancy Cates. I hope I pronounced it right. It's Cates, right?
Kate's, yes. My grandfather
Yes.
it used to be spelled Katzze, and my grandfather got tired of being called Cats, but people call me Cats all the time. So, but it is Kate's.
Very good. See, I got it right on the first try. And Zoe, I believe, who's the friendly, supportive cat who's somewhere in the background and will pop in periodically for her 2 cents.
She's now
um,
off camera, but yes, who knows how long that'll last.
So, I mean, you're an independent filmmaker and you have a big project right now. But before I jump into that, I always like to go back a little bit and say,
Mhm.
how did you get interested in this field? I mean, are you one of those kids like 4 years old, you're running around with the other half of like the toilet paper roll, like making believe you're filming people? I mean, was it a young passion?
I was given a Brownie camera at the age of 6, and I still have those photographs. And what's hilarious is, of course, I was really short. I'm still fairly short, but there are all these pictures of adults who are like, they look like giraffes above me, you know. But I was always interested in photography. The film part of it came a little bit later, and I was really encouraged in my education to study the great books, and I'm interested in history. So it was actually I was out of college and I was working as a journalist, and I um, got to do this little video piece that connected to something I'd written, and I just had this feeling in my stomach like, wow, I really have to do this. And I guess I'd had earlier inklings that I would be interested in making films, but I just didn't have a lot of I was never encouraged to do this. I was encouraged to, go to law school or something, business school. So yeah, it kind of developed in my 20s, and I did this little project, and I was like, I have to do more of this. So then I went off to film school, and I've been at it for quite a while now.
Well, so, I mean, do you recall your first time seeing a project, like, put together professionally, kinda polished?
Well, the film I made, so I went to Stanford's tiny documentary program, and they were really encouraging us to be professionals, even though we were learning. And I had a short film at Frameline, which is the Gay and Lesbian Film Festival in San Francisco, and I remember how terrified I was. It was at the Roxy, which is this little tiny theater in the Mission, and it was like all like there were a lot of people in the audience that I knew, and I don't know why I was so worried about it, but um that was one thing. And then I was very honored to receive the Student Academy Award for my master's thesis. And that was kind of a bigger stage. And it had just been finished. Like some of the other films in that competition had been out for a year, but mine was like fresh. So, I finished the film. You know, I think that the ceremony might have been before I actually even got my master's degree. Like, and then I graduated from my master's program, and it was kind of like, whoa. And they have the Student Academy Awards ceremony at this huge theater in LA with, at least at the time, the Oscar statues are there. And you kind of feel like, okay, they're taking me seriously. And I was sitting in the third row, and my parents had flown out from Boston. My father was still alive then, because I was getting this award. And they screened the films, and it was a lot of them had been done on video, and I had actually worked in 16, and the projection wasn't amazing for the 16 millimeter, but I could hear people behind me in the theater crying at the end of my film. And I thought, oh my God, like now I have to keep going with this. Like I made people cry. So that was
That
kind of a big moment. I mean, that film was about American women who served in the Vietnam War, and it's good that they cried. It's like it was a heavy thing. But anyway, that was one of those moments when I was like, okay, I guess I can't stop now. I have to keep doing this. So
that's the purpose of good art, right? To emote, right?
yeah,
So I
I don't
think
think
you
I really understood. I mean, I don't do this to manipulate people. And so I don't know that I understood that that would happen, because again, the film had just been finished. I hadn't, I had like two prints of it. And, I just didn't, I don't think I really understood anything about, even though I'd been studying documentary at Stanford for several years, I don't think I understood the power of film until I heard the people crying behind me. Um, I mean, I know that must sound ridiculous, but
No, no, I get it. I do. I mean, sometimes there's very different between theory, things that you experience in a classroom, and with anything, I think when you take it out into the real world, right, and experience, I think that could be said of almost any field,
Well, I
and
just
then
meant that it was ridiculous because I'd seen so many movies and I'd cried at some of them myself, but it just didn't occur to me that I could make something that would cause somebody else to cry. That's the part that,
yeah.
it was sort of new information, but it wasn't like I didn't understand the power of cinema as a medium. Um,
So I have to know why documentaries? Most people in the field are drawn more towards scripted. Why are you so compelled to do documentaries?
well, I came from, working in magazines and nonfiction, and I'm actually have gotten interested in narrative and sort of late middle age, but it was not, if you come from the world of journalism, like narrative film is not really what's natural. And I guess I like the quest for the truth. I mean, the truth is always
Mm,
very subjective, whether it's in documentary or a narrative film. But I mean, particularly, I would never have thought that we would be in a world where even the notion of truth is under so much attack these days. But
right?
yeah, I believe in telling true stories, and I think that real life is actually pretty interesting.
It's funny, I talked to an author once. She got several books, always writes nonfiction, and she said the same thing. I said, "Do you ever think about doing something in fiction?" And she said, "No, because the world is so interesting." I'm like, why would I want to make something up when the world around me is so fascinating?
Well, somebody started asking me about Orange is the New Black recently, just as an example. And I read the book, and I love the series partly because it's very queer and it's very multicultural and blah, blah, blah. But it gets completely ridiculous, which is sort of, the creator, what is her name? Kenji, no,
Kenji?
Kenji Lohan, yeah. Like that's her kind of her thing, like she did Weeds. But the book is a very serious thing about the incarceration system and, prison reform and what it's like to be incarcerated and, how do we change the, whole prison industrial complex, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of serious stuff in that series, but it's, it's to be entertaining in my world. Even though I loved watching it, I think that the book had more of an impact on me. But, maybe I just don't have enough of a sense of humor. I don't think that's true, but I mean, it's a different thing. It's a totally different beast, but
Well,
um,
very true. I mean, I had read the book too, going into that, and it is definitely a different spin. Or it's creatively they took it in I think a different direction, which as for its entertainment value was necessary. I think and probably a really good choice. But I agree that it deviated. I'm a little stickler too. There's a lot of times where I read the book and then they make a movie, even out of the scripted ones, that I don't like as much. Um, so it depends. Sometimes you hit a home run and you're like, okay, I can appreciate these two things as being different, but equal, right? Like I like them both, but I like them in different ways. And there are sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, I was so passionate and love this book, and this film, this television show just didn't capture it at all. So I
the
do
thing
agree. It's a hit or miss kind of thing.
is a different. I mean, I made a film about Susan Sontag, and Sontag famously said that she preferred the form of truth in fiction than in nonfiction, though she wrote a lot of nonfiction as well. And you know, that film was finished quite a number of years ago, so I've been thinking about this for 20 years or something now, and I think they both have a really valid place. In other words, maybe the imagination and the transformational quality of fiction is, you know particularly fiction that's told about real stories, is also valuable. It's just, I don't know, I think this is kind of like, do you drink coffee or do you drink tea? The tea drinkers will be like, ah, coffee, and the coffee people will be like, tea, why would you bother with that? So fiction, nonfiction. I actually drink both, so.
Now I'm a tea gal.
See, you see, so you would probably be like, coffee, bleh.
Coffee when I was young, like more of a college student. I had a brief fling with coffee. And and then off it went. Then I went into the tea world and I never looked back.
Okay,
Um,
so maybe my analogy is breaking apart with you, but
Sorry about that. So let's talk about your latest project, right? So Bayard Rustin. Tell me about this. Tell me about how you got involved, why you want to do it, why it's important.
so that's actually not my latest project. I finished that film in 2003. So just to be,
Oh, I'm
um,
sorry.
oh, it's okay. I mean, I was like, should I tell you? Should I? Yeah. So just to be clear, yeah, it's not that new. I mean, Rustin's kind of in the light at the moment. But
Because of the Netflix, I thought I did because of the Netflix film. I thought that um it felt new. I mean, I thought that was your absolute latest, but it's not. And I guess I have the chronology off. I apologize.
no,
But
no, no,
tell
it's
me about it
okay.
anyway.
It's okay. I did, like I said, I wasn't sure whether I should correct you or not. But what was your question? I'm sorry, I lost it in
Well,
there.
what made you get interested in it? And how did the process start for you?
So there was a man named Jervis Anderson who wrote for the New Yorker, who's been gone quite a while now, who wrote a book called Troubles I've Seen, Bayard Rustin, or maybe it's Bayard Rustin, Troubles I've Seen. That's the title. And I read the review of this book in the New York Times Book Review. And I've always thought this is sort of funny because how many thousands and thousands of people read the New York Times Book Review? But I read this review and I thought, wow, this guy started being an activist at the age of 15 and he kept going until the day he died at 75. And how many of us have a 60-year commitment to social change and social justice work? And I just thought, the rest of us are just schlubs by comparison. And I thought, what a life, what a commitment this guy had. And then if you're a filmmaker, the next thought immediately is like, someone should make a film about this person. And I had heard of him, but I didn't know anything about him. And, I also learned as I went along that as soon as you have that thought, someone should make a film about him or her, it's already too late. It's already going to be you. You think somebody else should do this, but no, it's you. I mean, unless somebody else is already doing this. And sometimes I have ideas that other people wind up making, and I think, okay, great, you do that. I'll do something else. But and I called up a friend who'd worked on Eyes on the Prize, the landmark civil rights television series that was made in Boston, and asked him, what do you think about this idea? And he said, oh, I've been thinking about it for since Eyes on the Prize ended. And it was just like this story that needed to be told that no one had told. And that's how this started. And then we got in touch with Rustin's surviving partner, Walter Nagel, and asked him, and somebody I think had tried before us to make a film and had not been able to raise the money, um, because documentaries are expensive, of course. So that's how this began. But it was this sense of kind of like, what can I learn from this person's life? And what am I doing with my life that maybe feels less significant than trying to end racism in America, trying to work for peace. He wasn't really a queer rights activist until the very end of his life, but he did speak out a little bit in the last year or two of his life. That wasn't his main issue. But anyway, that was the impetus, was this sense of, here's this man who's made this extraordinary contribution to American life, and nobody knows anything about him.
Were you happy with the finished product?
That's
And
a
I ask because
You
I
should never
think
ask any artist that question.
see, I like to get into that kind of stuff though, right? Because I focus on creativity really for the podcast. So I like to focus on the creative process and how people come up with their ideas, how they memorialize those ideas in whatever form it takes. And I think it's sort of interesting to take the creator through their own creation, because oftentimes when you say, well, how did you create this, and were you happy with the ultimate outcome, you get a lot of interesting answers. But the analysis of it, I think, is all part of the process, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the film, I would never have imagined the life that this film has had. I'm kind of starting at the end here. It's been shown all over the world. It continues to be used in companies and law firms and with activist groups and schools and colleges and churches. We got invited to the White House when he was given a posthumous Medal of Freedom because his partner felt that our film had really raised an awareness of who he was and why he was important. Um, there's this saying in film, like, no film is ever completed, it's simply abandoned at the point where no one can work on it anymore. and and that's kind of true. I mean, of course, I think we took it as far as we could take it. And, it had a amazing launch at Sundance and on PBS. And, you know, it's just what the way I think of art is. I'm okay. It's been a long time since I was doing high school math, but, do you know what an asymptote is? Is that
No.
line? There's a line like in trig where, you can approach this sort of line, but you never quite get there,
Right.
called an asymptote. And so art is like this thing. You're always trying to get closer to what you think is perfect, and you're never going to get there. And the film you're making in your head is absolutely perfect. And then you live in the real world and you do the best you can with the resources that you have and the time you have. I mean, it took 5.5 years to make this film, but did we get to the asymptote? No, we didn't. I should like get a better definition of what an asymptote is. But like if there's a curve like this, there's always this line that the curve is sort of approaching. It just
Yeah.
you don't get there.
Yeah.
That's art. It has imperfection. It does its best. But
Was it your visual though? I mean, what is I should ask that. It's this is art like any other form. What's your creative process? I mean, do you start with the ideas? Are they all mapped out already? I mean, do you sit down, put it all on paper, or are you truly a fly by the seat of your pants visual storyteller where you don't know what the focus of the story is going to be until you're actually walking it through?
yeah, it's an iterative process, I would say. So a lot of the time, you gather all these facts and you gather. I think it's sort of like making a quilt. I don't make quilts, but I know people who do. So you gather all the stuff that's like the fabric, and then you start cutting it up and putting it together and juxtaposing it. And then sometimes the piece of fabric itself is so exciting, like a piece of archival footage is so amazing that you use that. I had a big fight with the people I was working with on one piece of footage. There was a um, so Bayard Rustin was involved in the anti-nuclear movement in the 1950s, which was very tiny, very fringe. Like that was the nuclear age, right? Everyone, thought that we'd have free electricity because of nuclear power plants. And in the mid to late 50s, he was involved in all this anti-nuclear stuff, both in America and in England. He spoke at an important march in Trafalgar Square, and they did this protest. The French were doing an atomic test in what's now Ghana, and they went there to try to prevent this from going on, which is a really crazy thing to do. You don't want to put your body. It's one thing to put your body in front of a fence or something, to put it in the path of a nuclear detonation. I mean, they didn't get that close to it, but there was a animated film made by one of the peace organizations that Rustin worked with. That beautiful, like Hollywood quality animation that was against nuclear weapons. And I was like, we have to use this piece of footage. I found it at the Swarthmore Peace Archives. And the editor and my co-producer were like, no, we don't like this. There was some music attached to it, which makes it hard to edit. I mean, I fought and fought and fought for this to be included in the film. So that's a situation where the piece of fabric for the quilt drove the storytelling to some degree. But I also thought that it illustrated what he was doing in a beautiful way. So we cut from the animation to him in Trafalgar Square, or maybe the other way around. I should go look at the film again. But so you want to be open to what you discover. I don't write scripts and say we're going to go film this. I don't do that. It's very much like, I mean, editing is a very complicated thing in documentary or in any film, but in particularly in documentaries are really my documentaries are really kind of written in the editing room. So you have all this stuff. The process is first you assemble it, so it's called an assembly, which is just a bunch of stuff that's strung together in an order that sort of makes sense, that's not finely edited. And you look at that and you think about what you're trying to say. And in my case, since I tend to make biographies, this phases of someone's life and what is available to tell each part of that story, because Bayard Rustin at 15 is not the same person that he was at 75. And he went through all these movements and did all this work. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. It's a very complicated thing to make a documentary. When we worked with like 130 archives from around the world, we got some footage from Africa of that nuclear protest. It wasn't really very good, so we used the French one, which was better. But we found footage of him playing football in high school in 1931. So and we work with people who are experts at finding archival materials because it's an overwhelming job. There are photographs, there are all sorts of photographers of the civil rights movement, some of whom charge us a lot of money to find these photographs. But it's very hard to explain in 2 minutes how to make a documentary film.
No, no, I get it. I think I really admire visual storytellers, right? I mean, because I understand it's somewhat collaborative, and it involves a lot of hands in getting to the final product. But I think it takes a vision, right, that's probably running in the back of your brain as you're going through, and also to pick out what's where the real story is. I think that's a hard thing to do. Because you may start off with, "Oh, I wanna tell the story of how this little boy from the middle of nowhere turned out to be the president of the United States." Like, it's great to wanna tell a story, like the overall. I wanna tell this person's story, how this happened or how they got there. But that's really different than telling the story, right? I mean, you want to tell the story, but there's something to picking out the real truths and the real points to emphasize, and capturing the essence of any person or any story. It's not easy. It just isn't. And so I have a lot of respect for somebody who created a documentary, like any visual, really storyteller, because I think to take us visually through is such a difficult task, and when it's done well, uh,
Sorry,
you know,
the cat is stepping on the mouse, which I'm sure is very symbolic, but it's kind of here. Sorry about that.
all good.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also a great honor to tell someone's story. But we were given 84 minutes by PBS, and if you think about someone's lifetime, 84 minutes is nothing, really. I mean, you don't
No,
watch a 12-hour film about anyone, but and editing. That's why editing is important and necessary. But yeah, it involves making an awful lot of decisions. Are we going to use this shot or this shot? Are we going to cut from here to there or from there to something else? But the biggest questions are really like what what's important about knowing who this person was and what they were doing while they were alive, because I seem to unfortunately make films about people who are no longer with us, which is very annoying because you can't go interview them.
no. um, so would you say? I mean, how do you feel this was? I think it ran on Netflix.
Oh, sorry, I'm in the light. It was on public television. It
Oh,
wasn't on.
no, and it was on PBS, but
Yeah.
didn't Netflix, or at a minimum, base some of their film on your documentary?
Well, they certainly used it, but you'd have to talk to them about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how did it feel though to see that you somewhat then ignited, I guess, an interest or, a flashlight or a flame to his life?
Well, I think it's fantastic that he's getting the recognition that he deserves. I think it'd be nice if we got the recognition for doing this 20 years ago that we deserved, but I don't want to say the wrong thing here. In fact, I would prefer that you not use that. This is a
Sure,
very this is all very
absolutely.
sensitive. I,
Absolutely. I mean, can I just let's see. What about if I just ask, have you seen the film and the Netflix? Have you seen it, by the way?
I have seen it.
Okay. So have you seen the Netflix film about his life?
I have seen the film, and I thought that Coleman Domingo did a fantastic job as Rusted.
And, I can't help but feel that the attention, really came by your documentary 20 years ago, Shining a Light. Right there, that you brought attention to the world. So in some small way, I can't help feeling that, you you started, you're the starting point to bringing some attention to a life that was well deserved uh, of getting this recognition. So I give
Thank
you
you.
applause for that.
Thank you.
Um, and I'm gonna ask a question that you're gonna say I have absolutely no way of answering and don't wanna answer, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Do you have a favorite piece of work that you've done?
I mean, films are like children, right?
Right. That's what I knew. I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, no, you can't, it's I mean, I take very big subjects and I take a long time to make them, and so I haven't made that many films, and there are people who are much more prolific than I am. But no, I can't answer that question. It's you
Well,
know,
then tell me what you're working on now.
so I've started making a documentary about Urvashi Vaught, who was the head of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force in the 1990s. And, she's kind of like a latter day Bayard Rustin. She was very interested in intersectionality and working against sexism and against racism. She was often the only person of color in these very white, gay rights organizations that she led or was involved in. She very, very sadly died of cancer in 2022,
Mm.
and is quite deeply missed in a certain realm of particularly the queer political world. A lot of other people have never heard of her. So she's a little like rusted in that respect as well. But we're just getting underway with that, but it's been, really gratifying to work on this and to think about another activist figure and what she contributed, just the way that Rustin contributed so much. And I think often people are not recognized for what they do until long after they're gone, unfortunately.
Well, maybe one day you're going to pick somebody who's still here.
I'd like to. It's really annoying, And I actually, when I started this film on Urvashi, I was like, why the hell didn't I think of this when she was alive? I just didn't think of it, which is, my bad. But because I'm sure it would have been amazing to get to know her. I met her once after the Rustin film came out, actually, and she told me that she and her partner had watched our film with Billie Jean King and her partner, and I was like, I'm good. I can go now. I'd like to have a longer life, but that was like it was an amazing thing to hear.
Sure. Just, well, I'll ask this then. Have you met anybody in your process that you really admired and like getting the opportunity to meet them was like kind of overwhelming?
I've a lot of people. I mean, Andrew Young for the Rustin film. I got to meet Nadine Gordimer and actually see her Nobel Prize in her bedroom. And not only did she answer, so she knew Susan Sontag, which is why we went to Johannesburg to interview her. But like she had this beautiful dog, and then she invited us to have a drink with her afterwards. And we had to go back to the airport, but we were sitting on the sort of like veranda area outside of her house, and I was just like, I would give some part of my body not to have to go to the airport, to just stay here with Nadine Gordimer. And she was in her 80s, and I think she was a little lonely by then, but she was very, I don't know, like she wasn't, there are people who, particularly in our culture, who are very like self-promoting and want to tell you how great they are. And she was a pretty modest woman. She had written 13 novels or something and received the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I guess maybe if you do that, you have no reason to be self-aggrandizing because you've, been recognized by somebody else. But she was just an amazing human being. And I was like, why do we have to leave? This is so unfair. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, it's, I got to spend a lot of time with Bayard Rustin too. I mean, he wasn't alive, but, we were working on the film when 9/11 happened. And I think there was a period of time that I felt sort of insulated from some of the terribleness of what was going on in America and the world then, because I had Bayard Rustin, who was like a antidepressant. I mean, people used to call him like their favorite antidepressant. Um, and then after we were done with the film, then I got a little more discouraged about the state of the world. Because I didn't have that kind of daily reminder of, he was very optimistic. You have to be optimistic to work on the same issues for a huge chunk of your life. Because I once added it up, and it was something like 39 years between when he started working on civil rights and when the Voting Rights Act was passed, which was not, of course, the end of the need for civil rights, but it was a major, major victory. I mean, who
Yeah.
has the oomph to work on something? And these peace activists, like, I want to also talk about them. So he worked with these peace activists, particularly in the in the 40s and 50s. They were never going to achieve peace, right? But they were like the most incredible human beings. A lot of them are gone now from the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the War Resisters League. You know, they year in, year out, they were out there protesting and trying to, find a different way to solve human problems. So, it doesn't have to be someone famous who's gotten a Nobel Prize who can be inspiring. And it is an amazing part of the work I do is that people tell me their stories about their friendship with Bayard Rustin or Susan Sontag or Rashid.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, it's an interesting way. I mean, I enjoy myself talking to people, just hearing their stories and, um, what what drives them creatively. So I can imagine, like, out there putting those kind of projects together on the grand scale you are. Uh, it's got to be a good feeling.
Well, it's funny. I know you want to talk about the Rustin film. But when I made this film about Susan Sontag, I mean, Sontag was a very tough character, and a lot of her friends had what I called post Sontag stress disorder. So when I went to talk to them, it was really like therapy for them. Like they had these feelings that had never had a place to kind of go. And it was hard for me sometimes to hear, like, she was a jerk to this one or she blew off the friendship with this one. But, I see that as sort of a sacred part of what I do. That it is kind of like being a therapist, but, with a camera.
Sure. And I mean, and then, wow, that's really capturing the truth, right? Going back and getting oral history. Um, yeah, I like that. You're going back and kind of getting the oral history and capturing, whether it be the magnificence or the not so magnificence about people.
Well, that's the thing about biography, right? Like everyone has skeletons in their closets and everyone has things that, somebody else might be critical of. And, even Bayard Rustin, he had a big ego, and then you as a biographer are left sort of wrestling with yourself about how much of this should go in the movie. You know,
Mm.
can you tell someone's story without making them look either too good or too bad because none of us are perfect. And
Well, isn't that part of the story, though? Isn't the fact that you could achieve success where you can get to wherever you're going and still be flawed? I mean, isn't that part of the story overall?
of course, but I mean, a lot of people saw the film on Sontag and they were like, I hate her. And
Mm,
this is like after me maybe making a few decisions that I would rethink today about did I soft pedal it too much? I mean, those are just impossible questions. That's the nature of biography, right? I'm not here to pass judgment on the people I make films about. Not at all. In fact, usually I admire them, and that's why I'm willing to spend years of my life working on their stories. But and it's a tough thing. You don't know, like, and anytime you have anything that's at all critical of someone, there's somebody out there who's like the brother or the partner or the nephew or blah 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 who's going to be really upset by it. I'm
yeah.
not saying that we make films for the nephews and the brothers, but um, for example, Rustin was fired by this man named AJ Musty, who he was working for after he was arrested in Pasadena with two men in the back of a car. Um, and AJ Musty was a minister, so he was a Christian pacifist, and he felt like this, and he was sort of a father figure to Rustin, and it was very very painful. And I had very long conversations with Musty's grandson about what happened after Rustin was arrested, and and Musty had really mixed feelings about this, and I don't think that the grandson felt that we were fair to his grandfather, who really had done a lot to support Rustin, but also couldn't really be associated with him after he was arrested. These are complicated issues. And, I doubt that AJ Musty's grandson is listening to this podcast, but it's not, I think we did what we thought was fair, but his grandson will never think it's fair. I mean, just as an example.
Right.
I mean, of course, he wasn't there when these conversations were going on,
Well, yeah. Well, anything in life is decision making, right? I mean, it's all. Um, but again, I think creatively, where you put the attention are there interesting choices. I mean, and I have to believe they come from the point of, the point in your mind that you are most fascinated with about this person's story. So you believe that other people likewise, right, and will be, and then to have some sense of balance. I think documentary, format it's unique, unlike any other, right? But where you put the attention in that person's timeline or that person's story is going to matter.
Of
Um,
course. Yeah, and you have
yeah,
to make tough choices. I mean, to go back to that moment I'm talking about, there was a whole debate in another organization that fired him for this arrest about in the Quaker world about whether it was a bad it was reflected badly on the Quakers to disassociate themselves, like the Quakers who believe in love. That's their, you know, their thing. And there was this huge like exchange of letters amongst all these Quakers about this. And we just couldn't, we didn't have enough room in our film for it.
yeah.
But now I don't know, maybe I would try to include two of them because it was so amazing that in 1953 they were having a debate about whether it was ethical to fire a gay man for having sex as a gay man. That's pretty amazing. Which
Sure, I
is
mean, so, I mean, you're saying now if you were going back and doing it again, you might make some different choices, but that's the nature of the beast, isn't it?
well, yeah,
Uh,
once you finish a film, it's done. It's not like
done,
a play that you can rewrite, like I heard Tony Kushner talk about Angels in America, and there's a section of Angels in America that doesn't usually get performed, but it does sometimes. And it's not just that he rewrote the play at certain points for performances, but that the director then also changes the play because of the way they're staging that play. That's not what happens in film. The film is locked, it's done.
right?
And I think that's actually a relief. Like, I don't think I could go back and re-edit my films. That would just be, it'd be like going back to high school or something. It's like once was great, but it's enough.
Yeah. Second and third time, not so much. Yeah. No, so let's
Wait,
talk about.
can I say one more thing? I'm sorry to interrupt
Sure,
you. I think you actually touched on this. It's like you're a different person than you were when you made that decision about that project while you were young
sure.
making it. And that's really interesting too.
Sure. Well, as you evolve, I mean, I really think that certainly as I've aged, if I look at myself at 25, I'm definitely not the same person that I was. Right. And I wouldn't have even appreciated certain qualities that a person might have then that I do now. Like when I look at another person, whether, in any capacity, I feel like I appreciate qualities that I never would have even paid attention to all those years ago. And I think that's just the nature of, living, right? As you live, as you see life, as you see things that happen and how people treat each other and things you experience, and you go through the hurts and the highs and the lows, and you have the battle scars to show your journey that's gotten you to where you are. I think it also helps mold your opinions and your vision, and I think you're much more able to tell a flawed story well as you age, than you are when you're young. I think flaws seem so much more magnified to you when you're young. Yeah, it's all more black and white, good and bad, black hat, white hat.
Yeah,
Uh,
Rustin did not speak out against the Vietnam War because he was interested in being connected to the Democratic Party, and Lyndon Johnson was in office, and so he felt like he couldn't alienate the people in the Democratic Party who had finally brought people like Rustin into their fold after ignoring them for decades, literally. And so the people on the left that he was allied with were very upset with him, and we struggled a lot to tell that part of the story because he never really explained in any piece of footage why he wasn't speaking out against the war. And it was a very hard section of the film to edit, and I was personally disappointed in him. And again, I'm older now than when we made the film, and I think I understand more about, he might not have liked it as much being, in cahoots with the Democrats as he did when he was younger and he was like a street activist, and he would not, and he said that politics requires compromise, and protest does not require compromise. And he wrote this very important piece, From Protest to Politics, but he felt that in the mid 60s that the civil rights movement had to evolve to a political sort of force as opposed to solely a protest force. He was very smart. He was like this real strategist. And, I think about that all the time. And do we make compromises in our, middle years that we wouldn't make when we were younger? Sure. But when we were younger, we didn't really understand the world and its complexities in the same way,
Agreed.
or the partnership that benefited the civil rights movement by being connected to the Democratic Party, for
Wow,
years.
it's fascinating. I could sit and talk to you all day. Um, so tell people how they can get more information about you and the work you're doing.
Well, the Rustin Film has a website, rustin.org. The new film on Shivad does not have a website. We have Facebook groups for both the Rustin film and the Sontag film. They're not that active. The Sontag film came out 8 years ago. Yeah, I mean, people should feel free to reach out to me through the Rustin website. If that's, I do speak at colleges, universities, churches. It was really funny. There's a Quaker meeting like 2 blocks from my house, and they were showing my film, and they didn't get in touch with me. So I just called them. I'm like, why didn't you invite me? And they were like, well, we didn't know that you lived 2 blocks away. And I kind of like invaded their screening. I'm like, God damn it, this is in my neighborhood. You have to invite me. But I'm always happy to talk about Rustin, and thanks for the opportunity to do it today.
Oh, well, I mean, you created something that you floated out into the world that, it's going to be here, forever. And I think you gave attention to just, a well-deserved career. And that in and of itself is to be applauded. And I really just like the fact that you're creating um, these truths, but by picking carefully people that maybe, we pass on the street and we don't give the attention to, but have moved the ball in one way or another, right? Have changed how we live in some way. And oftentimes those are the people that get no attention. So I like that. I like that a lot. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope, and it's an open invitation, of course, but I hope that you'll continue to come back and talk to me as you're creating new projects.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too. And yeah, thank you for asking such good questions. So,
And I'll put links up for anybody, for the best methods that you can reach Nancy. I encourage you to really check it out. This is important work that she's doing, and it's well worth your time to check it out. So I'll be watching. Whatever you do, I'll be watching, Nancy. Thank you.
thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.